Welcome to the penultimate episode of Municipal Affairs of 2024, where we are looking back on the year of 2024. Today, we will be reflecting on a year that has been as transformative as it has been challenging for municipalities. This past year, our cities, towns, villages, and rural communities have been at the forefront of some of the most pressing issues of our time. From navigating the financial ripple effects of economic uncertainty to embracing innovation and infrastructure and housing. All the while, local governments have proven that they are more than just the closest to the people. They're the problem solvers, the innovators, and often the ones who get things done when higher levels of government fall short. And joining me today for our penultimate episode to look back at 2024 in the province of Alberta, President of Alberta Municipalities, Tyler Gandam. From the smallest village to the largest city, across every region of the province, Alberta Municipalities represents the communities where over 85% of Albertans live. ABMunis provides a united voice for 265 of Alberta's 330 municipalities, including summer villages, towns, cities, and specialized municipalities. As Alberta's largest municipal group, ABMunis listens to municipal leaders and advocates for solutions to their common issues. Additionally, ABMunis supports local governments by providing services specially designed to meet their operational needs. And they bring their members together regularly so they can share ideas and information so that their communities can thrive. Check out Alberta Municipalities at abmunis.ca and follow them on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, now called X. Tyler, thank you so much for sitting down with me today to talk about the last 12 months in municipalities in the province of Alberta, but also looking forward to 2025 for municipalities. I want to start by looking at the past 12 months for municipalities across the province. And at the end of it, of 2024, how would you describe the state of municipalities in the province?
I think, as always, it's collaborative. One of the things that I love is when we get together through convention, through webinars, going out and doing member visits. Everybody seems to be in really good spirits. Looking forward to 2025 and, of course, the start of silly season with the election coming up in October. But I think the state of municipalities is really good. Everybody's kind of working together, and I think there's a lot more networking that's going on right now between municipalities than ever before.
You talk about collaborative, and I want to pick up on that keyword because you and I have chatted a few times this year because the province has come out with very new bills and regulations around what municipalities can and can't do, whether that be Bill 18, Bill 20, Bill 21, and the list goes on. Looking from a collaborative approach from the province and municipalities, how would you say that has grown or been challenging in 2024?
I think as we started 2024, we were looking for some more opportunity to sit down and talk with the government about the legislation that they were proposing. There were definitely some pieces of that legislation that we didn't feel were in the best interest of municipalities. And so we made those known to the province. And I think as we moved through the year, we had the opportunity for, I think, 4 or 5 webinars on Bill 20, talking about the Local Authorities Elections Act. And then as we rounded out here in the fall, there wasn't as much legislation passed or proposed coming in. So it was a lot quieter for us in terms of diving deep into what that would look like. So I think that as the year's gone on, it's definitely gotten a lot better in terms of communication with the province. One of the things I've appreciated over the last couple of years anyways is the relationship that I've had with Minister McIver. While him and I don't always agree on things policy-wise, that doesn't mean that we're not always willing to help each other out. I had to message him earlier this week about a question on the Local Authorities Elections Act, and within 45 seconds, I had a text back, and he was on it. So while on the surface it doesn't look like maybe we're getting along, but certainly we've got a great working relationship, and that's something that I hope to build on for 2025.
you talk about the collaborative nature within the municipalities itself. I know Alberta municipalities this year took a very proactive approach in meeting with members in their community. I just recently spoke with Dan Rude, your outgoing CEO, and he talked about how that was a big priority over the last few years for Alberta municipalities is to meet members in their communities. In 2024, what did you hear as the most common issue or challenge that municipalities are facing today?
I think everybody's feeling that financial crunch. We're seeing that now as budgets are being passed or municipalities are going through budget deliberations. There's some pretty big numbers for what the increase is going to be for 2025. And so there's a mix between maintaining that level of service, being proactive in some of the work that we're doing in our municipalities. But at the same time, we're also feeling that crunch of not as much money coming into the municipality to help us out with some of those things. And obviously, infrastructure is a big part of that.
I want to talk about the financial challenges you just mentioned. Earlier this month, the federal leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Pierre Poilievre, in a news conference in Aurora, Ontario, made comments about the infrastructure funding that municipalities are asking the federal government to get. And I'm quoting here, and I'm going to quote verbatim as it is reported. And he said, and I quote, municipal governments, don't ever let them bullshit you, are bursting with cash and they're wasting it all. End quote. Tyler, as president of Alberta Municipalities, as someone who does their own budget, is currently in the process of doing their budgets, are municipalities wasting the money that they get from the provincial and federal government?
Absolutely not. And I think the best part about how to respond to that quote is share how municipalities go through their budgeting process, how their financials are recorded and reported, and puts it back to both the provincial and federal governments and how budget deliberations could and should go. Everything's done publicly. Everything that we've got in reserves is public. We do audited financials for the previous year. I'm not sure where these municipalities are bursting at the seams with money, or I would love a few recommendations or a few examples of where municipalities are wasting money. Because, man, we could sit down and talk about where the federal government is wasting money if we want to get into that debate, but absolutely not. We're doing the best we can with what we have. We continue to see cuts both provincially and federally in terms of funding, and yet municipalities are super resilient, able to get the job done and continue to deliver that level of service to our community members and our business owners every single day. So unequivocally, not a chance.
Does this go back to the FCM's call for a new fiscal framework for municipalities? Because you and I've chatted a few times, and I've chatted with your sister organizations across Canada over the last few weeks about municipalities are feeling that financial crunch because they only have one source of revenue, one major source of revenue that they can tap into, and that is property taxes. Are you optimistic that in 2025 a new framework would be able to get achieved, or are you pessimistic like I've been hearing from other sister organizations?
I'm probably I wouldn't say pessimistic. I'm realistic. There's an election coming up in 2025 in the federal on the federal side, so I can't see that that is going to be a priority. Something that FCM is going to continue working on for sure, and all of our provincial associations will continue to support that. Something has to change. We're at a time now where immigration is extremely high. The shortage of housing is extremely high. The cost of living continues to grow. And again, there's only one source of revenue, regardless of which order of government you're in. So I think that while it's absolutely necessary that that changes, it's not going to in 2025.
Infrastructure was a key issue that was brought up across Canada this year with it being highlighted by what took place in Alberta in Calgary actually in June of 2025 with a water main feeder being burst and causing potential challenges to the water supply in the city. After that major water main break, do you think municipalities took a serious look at their asset management programs and what the future of their aging infrastructure was in 2024, looking at 2025? Because I can imagine Calgary's not the only one with 70-year-old pipes in the ground right now.
No, not at all. Many municipalities are. And just a quick side story, Wetaskiwin redid our main street over the last decade, and we were pulling out infrastructure that was 100 years old, some wood and clay pipe that we had under our main street from when the city was first built. So I know that there's many municipalities across the country that are over 100 years old and are dealing with that infrastructure problem. I think one of the worst times for that pipe to break in Calgary was during FCM. So there was a number of municipalities in Calgary that actually felt the effects of that broken infrastructure. And so I'm sure they went back to their municipalities and made sure that they were going to start looking after their infrastructure or taking note of the age of the infrastructure and what shape it's in to make sure that a major break like that doesn't happen, because while maintenance is expensive and it creates problems of its own, there's nothing like an emergency brake like that that's going to have to cost you a ton of money and probably a lot longer than it is to do that maintenance work.
Do you think the province heard the calls from Alberta municipalities to increase that LGFF funding? Because I've spoken to Minister McIver as well, and he says municipalities will always want more money, and it's just we only have a certain amount of money that we can give, and at the end of the day, they will have to go with what they have. Paraphrasing, not his exact words. Um, do you think the province heard those calls from Alberta municipalities and municipalities across Alberta to increase LGFF, or are you pessimistic going into 2025 that it's going to be the same?
I know for sure they know the struggles that we're going through at the municipal level. Even just how much money has been cut from when it was MSI to the LGFF program. We went from $420 per resident to about $186 per resident, spending nearly 4% of the provincial budget on infrastructure down to 1%. So, I mean, they have to recognize that while municipalities might be asking for money all the time, there's very clear evidence that the amount of money that we were receiving before isn't what we're receiving now. And I think that we'll continue to make the case as to why municipalities need more money, especially for infrastructure. But I think they did hear it because they did introduce a new grant stream for the fast moving municipalities. It's $60 million, but 15 of that will go to municipalities under 10,000. Excuse me, over the next 3 years. So they're hearing it, they recognize it, but there are some big infrastructure projects, even just dealing with the growth. I was with Mayor Heron in St. Albert a couple of months ago, and she showed me a parcel of land that I think they borrowed 60 or 70 million dollars on just to tie in the wastewater and water infrastructure for the annexation and the growth that they're seeing in St. Albert. And that doesn't even take into consideration the infrastructure that's 30, 40, 50 years old. So we've estimated there's probably $30 billion of an infrastructure deficit across the province and growing. And it's important that we start addressing that both municipally, because municipalities have a responsibility to play in that too, but certainly from the provincial government.
One of the big topics that you and I haven't chatted about this year was what took place over the summer months in Jasper. Mayor Ireland was on the front lines of one of the most devastating fires that ever ravaged the national park and his community. You, as president of all municipalities, I'm assuming, have had conversations with Mayor Ireland. Um, Looking at the last 12 months, do you believe, and in your opinion, would you say municipalities are looking at these weather events and these climate disasters more seriously than they ever have after seeing the effects in Edson, Hinton, Fort McMurray, Slave Lake, and now Jasper? Or are we still going to be playing catch up in 2025?
I think we're still going to be playing catch up. And then you look at the hailstorms in Calgary in the south and the impact that it has. Weather's obviously changing. The impacts of climate change is being seen, especially in Alberta. And I mean, my heart goes out to Mayor Ireland and his community. While he's dealing with that for his community, he's also dealing with the loss of his house, his personal effects, right? So, I mean, there are so many moving parts to a story like that, where a mayor is on the front line doing the best that he can for his community while at the same time trying to take care of his personal life too. And I think we need to recognize that elected officials are dealing with a lot more than just what's coming in on a budget, whether or not the streets are getting plowed, or everybody's got personal lives, everybody's got things going on in their own lives that need to have some recognition as well. So, but yes, absolutely, I know that even the province is taking steps in mitigating some of these risks to the communities, especially that are surrounded by heavily forested areas. So it's important that we learn from what's happened before, and try to make sure that whatever we're going to be facing in 2025, we're going to be able to do it the best way that we can, while mitigating as many risks as we can leading up to that.
One of the mitigating risks that the province was trying to tackle at the beginning of this year, looking at the summer months, was the drought conditions that we traditionally see in the summer months. Now, I've chatted with Okotoks Mayor Tanya Thorne on the show about water conservation and the ways that people can conserve. But looking at it from a municipal perspective across the province, do you believe that municipalities rolled up their sleeves and helped with the province mitigate those drought issues that could have been more problematic if the province and the municipalities didn't work together, and other key stakeholders, I should say, as well, that they were able to come together and find a solution to make sure that we didn't have water issues during the summer months when we were seeing these wildfires prop up?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it hits home when it's happening in your home province. So I think that it makes it a lot easier to take those directives seriously when we're talking about water conservation. I know that Alberta Municipalities has done a good job over the last few years talking about water conservation, and sharing why it's so important. I mean, even if it's just, if you think of it only as financial and the impact that you have, there are 100 reasons to be taking this seriously, and I know that many of our municipalities, especially in the south, that struggle with water, um, are doing as much as they can.
Oh, did you? Oh, I thought you were still talking. I thought you froze there for a second, cutting that out. I was like, okay, he's still going on right there. I want to turn to a sensitive topic because at the end of this month, literally at the end of this year, actually, Alberta municipalities will be losing two of its members to amalgamation and dissolution, one in Clearwater County and one in Paint Earth County, the MD of Paint Earth. These smaller villages have been having a tough time with financial challenges on their own because limited supply of money, limited people living in the communities. Looking back, are you concerned that what we're seeing at the end of this year could be happening in 2025 as well? Or are you optimistic that municipalities can weather the financial crisis that they're currently in?
I'm I'm less optimistic that we aren't going to be seeing more of that coming. I think we are absolutely going to see more of that. Uh, Less population, municipalities not growing, but it also costs more money to mobilize and get work done in these smaller communities. And that's part of the reason that we had pushed so hard to have a, a bigger funding source through the LGFF model, was for these smaller communities, was to help maintain some of the infrastructure that they have there. And so it's difficult, I think, on both sides of that, where you can make the argument that the smaller communities need more support for that, but at the same time, um, smaller communities need to look and see how viable they are. And I mean, these smaller communities that are amalgamating and merging into these counties aren't losing their identity. They still have the name, they're still the village of, or they can be the town of. And I think what's important is that they're creating spaces for their residents and business owners that are prosperous, and they're able to grow and thrive. And so I understand how hard it is to lose that piece of it, but at the same time, I think it's important that we're keeping things as viable as we possibly can. And I think we're starting to see a little bit more and more often, these smaller communities going through viability reviews, to see what we can to help them work through that. One of the things I talked about with Minister McIver was, they tend to get some warning signals that municipalities are struggling with viability, and how we can be supportive with that through our association for these smaller municipalities. Alberta municipalities can offer administrative support, or um, advice, anything that we can do to help these smaller communities that don't have the um, I don't want to say strength because the administrators that they have are extremely strong, but I mean the amount of administrative support that some of the bigger communities have, and making sure that our association can be there to support them when they are having some tough times, and helping with some grant applications and maybe some best practices. Which is why I think it's really important that when we meet at conventions or when we have our spring and summer MLCs, elected officials can come together and share some best practices and commiserate a little bit too. Like if you're having a hard time with something, there's nothing better than being able to talk about it with somebody else who's been through it too. So I think as a whole, our association of nearly 265 members is a lot stronger because of how close we are with one another and how much we share just life as a politician or life as an administrator in a municipality.
Want to talk about one last subject before we turn to the organization as a whole in 2024. And it's a very inside baseball conversation that we're going to have here. Over the last 12 months, I have noticed, and I'm an outsider perspective, but you're someone who deals with members more often than I do. But I've been noticing code of conducts being thrown around a lot, and potentially even, I would dare to say, weaponization of code of conducts against fellow members of council from other members of council or administration. Minister Amory, Minister McIver said there was going to be changes to that code of conduct process, so they aren't being as weaponized as they potentially see them are now. Can you give us an update? Have you had that conversation with Minister McIver that he announced earlier this year and Minister Amory, or are we looking at potentially seeing this still happening in 2025 and leading up to the 2025 municipal elections here in the province?
Very high level conversations about codes of conduct. It's interesting because a few years ago, Minister McIver talked about getting rid of codes of conduct, and collectively, municipalities told him, no, not a chance. And now we're talking about why do we have codes of conduct? And so it's a little bit of which way do you want to go with it? I think codes of conduct have absolutely been weaponized. I think that it's really unfair for some members of council to have to go through the abuse that some administrators and some members of council have put forward using that code of conduct punitively. But on the flip side, I also know of instances where members of council aren't doing their job, have been held accountable through sanctions and codes of conduct, and sanctions have zero teeth. There's absolutely no recourse for a member of council who doesn't follow through on sanctions. And so there definitely needs to be some changes to that, taking into consideration what it looks like to be used against somebody because you don't like them versus somebody who is breaking a code of conduct, needing sanctions and having some teeth to that too, so that there are there has to be something that holds members of council accountable. And I think back to my own experience, recall petition being used and being weaponized, and it was a few times in our province this year. But I supported a homeless shelter and had a recall petition filed against me, and it went nowhere. It got very little support, other than for 60 days I got to watch on social media how I was being attacked, misinformation that was being shared, lies about me that were being shared. So it's really unfair that members of council would have to go through that. So,
No,
I mean, there has to be
I
some changes for sure.
I appreciate your honesty and candor there, and I just because it was a topic that I heard a lot at Alberta municipalities, and since we met in Red Deer. I want to turn to Alberta Municipalities, the organization now, because as of recording this on Friday, December 13th, yesterday, December 12th, Alberta Municipalities made their big announcement that has been somewhat long time coming, but it was an announcement that everyone I was watching at least, and that is the appointment of your new CEO on January 2nd. Dana Mackey will be taking over from Dan Rude as the chief executive officer of the organization. I've got to ask a simple question. What made Mr. Mackey the heir apparent to Mr. Rude?
His energy, his preparedness, his insight, his background, and his experience. I think Alberta Municipalities has an amazing culture within its staff and within the organization, and it was really important to the committee members who went through this hiring process over the last 5 or 6 months that was going to be maintained. We have an amazing organization. Our association runs incredibly well. And for us, when we were going through this process, it was important that any of the candidates that we talked to understood that we were looking for somebody to take the ball and carry on with what we had, not looking for somebody to come in and rock the boat and looking for some fundamental changes. So we really appreciated his ability to lead a team, his ideas and insight for what we could do moving forward. And again, from an outside perspective, seeing what Alberta Municipalities is and how we look on the outside, and then what he feels we're going to be able to do moving forward.
Is it a loss of Dan Rude though? Because I can imagine, as someone who's dealt with exclusively with him over the your first year in office as president, he probably was someone who was able to be leaned on and talked to through these issues that Alberta municipalities have been going through over the last 12 months.
Absolutely. Dan was a unicorn. When we were going through the start of the CEO recruitment process, I was worried about who we were going to be able to find that was going to fill Dan's shoes because he is one in a billion. There's no question. His ability to manage the business side of things, his advocacy, his relationship. I learned a lot, even in the last year under Dan's leadership. As a new president, I certainly took his advice to heart, knowing that he's been around the association for 20 years and then just about 8 as the CEO. It's a huge loss to the association, and you can tell even just over the last few months with staff worrying about what that change is going to look like because of what Dan brought to the table and how he ran the organization. So, I mean, I can't say enough good things about Dan. I'm really excited for him and his retirement. I know him and his wife Lana have a trip planned very early in January, so I'm excited for him to have a break and not have to worry about what's going on back at home. But he's going to be tremendously missed, not only with Alberta municipalities, but in the municipal world as a whole. We were just in Ottawa for FCM, and some of the other province and territory CEOs were there too, and they all shared with me how much they really enjoyed working with Dan and what he brought to the table. So, yeah, he'll definitely be missed across the country, especially in Alberta.
Looking at 2025, what's your hope for municipalities in the next 12 months? Because as you mentioned at the top of the interview, we are literally, because I've been seeing the social media posts, entering silly season, aka election season for municipalities. So traditionally during the election years, those big provincial wide issues sort of get missed and they sort of go by the wayside because everyone starts looking at that local issues from Alberta municipalities perspective. How do you keep those provincial wide advocacy work ongoing when all your members will be focusing on potential re-elections or potential retirements like Dan?
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things with the bench strength we have with Alberta municipalities and our staff. They can keep their foot on the pedal all throughout that year. They're not looking at elections. They're not worried about whether or not they're going to have a job or whether or not they even want to run for this position again. So they're going to be able to continue that work. And we've got 15 board members who love municipalities so much that they're going to continue that work on behalf of municipalities, just like we have. You talked about the community visits that we've been doing as a board, and we've ramped that up over the last little while. And that's because we've got a board that really loves our members, loves going and visiting other communities and offering some help where we can. Or there's lots of times where we go out to a community and we learn something new that we are able to bring back to our community. So it's a give and take relationship for sure. But yeah, no, we will continue to work on municipal issues, advocating on behalf of municipalities. We've got a strong board. We've got an amazing staff. I'm not worried about that at all. What I am worried about is the support that we're going to be offering to municipalities coming through this election year, because things absolutely go off the rails. You'll see elected officials saying and doing things that they may not normally say or do, knowing that it's going to be a soundbite for an election coming up, or they're going to have to be fending off people who are looking to be elected and dealing with the lots of the social media posts, misinformation, or just character assassinations to have an election go a different way than they'd like it to. So it's dubbed very well silly season, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And
I'm imagining one of the big things that you're going to be watching this year, particularly from the election standpoint, is the vote tabulators. Because I know Alberta municipalities at their Red Deer convention called on the provincial government to allow municipalities to have those vote tabulators, but we're going to hand count. The province says no, it's not going to happen, and we're going to hand count. I know one person who's already said he's going to volunteer, and that is your former CEO, Dan Root, who said, no, I'm going to be out there hand counting ballots because that's how democracy works. And I applauded him for that. Are you concerned that this election could be a lot longer than the traditional 1 day election period because of that hand counting process that could take a few days and could be a lot longer and a lot more expensive?
yeah, I anticipate that there are going to be some substantial changes, whether it's going to be far more expensive or it's going to take longer or both. I know that during the last election, Wetaskiwin went to a hand count, and we didn't find out results until it was like 4 or 5 in the morning, and those weren't even final results. That was just enough to be able to make a statement as to what the election looked like. We were also dealing with the referendum questions from the province, so that didn't help in terms of timeline. But when you're already struggling in communities to find workers for anything that's going on, let alone volunteers, it's going to take a lot of resources to make this happen. And a big part of that is going to be a financial impact to the municipality. Some of them have already come out with estimates of what it's going to cost changing from tabulators to hand counting. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like following this election, both the change in how much time it took and how much money municipalities spent in hiring election workers.
Tyler, I'm cautious of time and I know you're a busy man and I know you have other meetings that you have to get to today, but I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sitting down with me today and sitting down with me over the last 12 months. It's been an honor and pleasure to get to know you a little bit more. And I always look forward to our conversations because I know I'm always going to get a great conversation out of this. So thank you so much for appearing on the show today. And thank you so much for everything you've done for the show and helping us get our word out. So thank you so much.
And Chris, I want to thank you for all of the work that you do for municipalities. I don't know anybody else who works as hard as you do across the country. I see you in Ottawa. I see you at the FCM events. I saw you at the Association of Manitoba Municipalities. I saw you've got your trip booked up north for the Yukon Association. I don't know anybody who works harder than you and who brings the voice of municipalities to everybody else. So on behalf of myself and my association and everybody across the country, thank you for being the voice of municipalities and doing that work and getting our stories out there. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in for our second last episode of 2024 here on Municipal Affairs. Now, we are honored, we're blessed, we are so happy that we have found an audience in you who has taken time out of their day or week or month to sit down and listen to the great stories that municipal leaders from across Canada have to tell. When we started the show in 2023, looking at the issues that municipalities were faced with, we couldn't have imagined that we would become a little fish in a very big media pond, but here we are. And I'm so honored that you've put your trust into me to tell your stories. And I'm so honored that you have put your trust into me to tune in week after week, day after day, and sometimes twice, 3 times a day to listen to me talk to municipal leaders from across Canada. It has been an honor and a pleasure to do this show. And I'm so blessed that you have tuned in and helped me grow this show as much as it has over the last 12 months. We will be back tomorrow with a brand new episode, our last episode of 2024, where we're going to be sitting down with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities President, Rebecca Bly, to talk to her about municipalities in Canada in 2024 and what's in store for 2025. So until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. See you tomorrow.